After watching A Quiet Place day one, I have to say this might be a perfect movie. And I'm gonna walk through a few of the reasons that makes this movie so great. It's in the intention behind the character crafting, and also a lot of the simple concepts that keeps this film grounded. It makes it so much more realistic for the audience to actually see themselves in this film, to actually relate to the characters. And it does something that honestly Hollywood has not been doing very well recently. And I think that might be the real ticket for this film being such an enjoyable success. If you enjoyed A Quiet Place and A Quiet Place Part 2, and you keep up with the creators of those films, I'm sure you probably know and have heard that this film was not necessarily created and directed by the same individuals. It's not even about the same family. But just to get you familiar with who are the creators of this film, the producers are Michael Bay, actually, Andrew Form, Bradley Fuller, and yes, of course, John Krasinski. The movie was directed by Michael Sarnowski, and you might know him from his movie Fight Night Legacy or Pig. The director of photography was Pat Scala. He was the cinematographer for Monster and Men, as well as Sing Sing, and again, working with Michael Sarnowski, Pig. The lead actor of this film was Lupita Nyong'o. She plays a character called Sam. You might have recognized her from either the film Us or probably Black Panther. And the second lead is Joseph Quinn. Again, you probably have seen him in either Overlord or Stranger Things. He plays the character Eric. When I first realized this film was not going to be a third installment of the John Krasinski story with Emily Blunt and the kids, I was kind of disappointed. I had gotten used to seeing their story, and I'm sure you probably felt the same way on some level. It's not that we're not curious about what this catastrophic alien invasion happens to be in places like New York. However, I was just unsure that this film was going to deliver in the same way that the first two films did. But when I watched this movie, within the first 10 minutes, I was fully invested in these characters. And having seen the previous two films, knowing the danger that is about to come, it was very important that they built empathy and liking of these characters on some level, so you just don't want to see them die. And if they do die, it really matters to you. So I'm gonna look at how they crafted these characters in such a strong way very briefly here. And I've broken it into kind of four main categories. The first one to look at is their struggles. Does this film clearly communicate the characters' struggles? Because struggles is very important for us to be able to relate to them and understand the world and the rules of the game that we're playing in. For Sam, she's dying and has sorrowfully accepted it. She has given up on her dreams and has been ripped away from her home and comforts. These are the struggles that she deals with. And then we look at Eric. He is alone. He can't get back to his family. He is afraid of dying. These characters do not need to have super complex struggles in order for it to be engaging and relatable and actually mean something to the viewers. It honestly can just be primal instincts and everyday struggles that people deal with. It can be as simple as a fear of dying, but it makes it relatable and it causes the character to have more of a liking and have more empathy from the audience. The next one is their motivations. For Sam, she wants to experience her happy place one last time. It's not just music and pizza that she loves, it's her memories of her family, specifically her father, and her home. She wants to remember happiness again before she dies. She's motivated by her last wish, and her last wish is to capture the joy, the spark, the happiness of life that was lost when for a while now she has just been living in a constant end date, in that my life is being cut short because of my condition. For Eric, well, he's driven. He's attending law school in the States. He sees that he can make a future for himself. He's also driven to stay with Sam on her pizza quest when she tries to abandon him from her apartment. In contrast to his struggles, which is fear of death, he's also driven to stay alive. And in fact, it's interesting that he's introduced in a scene that makes it seem as though he is the only survivor of a very serious, very catastrophic subway flooding, and that he is the most driven to stay alive. Another really key aspect to storytelling and character writing is avoid perfect characters. For Sam, she's not a perfect character at all. She is relatably depressed by her situation. This causes her to be rude and push people away. For Eric, he seems to have some kind of panic disorder. So for all the good that he brings to the table with helping Sam, he is a major liability in this survival scenario. And the last area to focus on is clear goals from these characters. This is a survival story, and so the goals are kind of baked into that in some level. For Eric, stay alive so he can get back home somehow, someday. For Sam, it's to stay alive long enough to experience happiness one last time. Again, these character areas do not need to be very complex. They just need to be cleverly communicated while also being clearly communicated to the audience, so the audience sees themselves, or at least an emotion they have, in the characters that they are observing. It's so important that studios flesh out their characters in even simple, very human ways, because it's going to bring the audience on a journey as opposed to the audience just observing a thing that's happening and hoping that they're entertained enough to maybe say it's good. Getting to certain aspects of the show that makes this great outside of the characters. The first thing, obviously, is New York is brilliant. I know we've seen probably hundreds, if not thousands, of films take place in New York City, but when it comes to this specific story, it's so unique and interesting. And I love how the film opens up with New York is at a constant state of around 90 decibels. It's just a beautiful picture to paint for the audience, knowing what the threat is and what the threat comes from and how the threat is attracted to you. Also, I've never watched a movie that feels so incredibly like New York as this film. I have had the opportunity to visit New York City on 2 separate occasions, and those scenes where they're going across the bridge, or they're in Chinatown, or in the small theater, or the crowded streets. This just feels so authentically New York. And it was captured in such a brilliant way because it's not necessarily the attractive Manhattan Sex and the City kind of New York vibe. It's really the gritty kind of backstreet side of New York that you don't really experience in cinema as much as I've seen unless you visit the city for yourself. You talk about capturing the magic of New York. I feel like this film in some ways did capture the magic and the essence of what modern day New York is. And one area that this film kind of pushes away from the automatic go-tos of Hollywood sequels is the constant choice to one-up in the sequel what the previous film had already established. It's like Hollywood these days just wants to make it more complex and more thrilling in each sequel. This film does not do that. This film knew that the aliens and the rules established in the previous films were enough to keep the audience engaged. And they did not try to add any extra lore or details to the alien invasion that we didn't already know or assume. It was just the same invasion, same aliens, same survival rules, but with new characters in the largest city in the world. And when you're making a sequel or a spin-off with new characters and a new setting, you do ask the question, should we try to tie this into the previous films or previous characters? All they did to tie the films together was using one character from A Quiet Place Part 2. On IMDb for A Quiet Place 2, he's credited as Man on the Island. In this film, in A Quiet Place Day 1, he's credited as Henry. And they kept it simple. All they did was basically say that Henry and his family were in New York when the invasion happened. And during his time getting out of the city and surviving with his family, he learned that these aliens didn't like water, which leads to the obvious solution that he comes up with to establish a small island community to try to live life in some kind of normality and generally safe from this extremely dangerous invasion and threat from the mainland. I like that they kept it simple. I like that they didn't try to have a crazy plot twist that ties it in with the other films. It adds a little bit of backstory to the man on the island or Henry without really changing a whole lot and allowing these characters, both Sam and Eric, to breathe on their own without being overshadowed by the previous two films. Ultimately, this film was written, directed, filmed, acted, and executed perfectly. I couldn't have asked for a better follow-up to both incredibly successful Quiet Place movies. I really appreciate that they took so much care in crafting this third installment of the franchise. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. You can also support by going to the link down in the description and joining the Patreon or joining the channel memberships. It's only $3.99 a month. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.